Welcome back to the historian's Tome, where ancient mysteries meet peaceful slumber. I'm here with you tonight as we journey together to one of the most isolated places on Earth, where stone giants stand eternal watch over secrets lost to time. Before we begin our voyage to Easter Island, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Your support helps us continue bringing you these historical journeys into restful sleep. I'm curious to know where you're watching from tonight and what time it is where you are. Are you settling in for the evening, or perhaps it's already deep into the night where you rest? Wherever you are in this world, allow yourself to get comfortable. Close your eyes and let the gentle waves of history carry you toward peaceful dreams as we explore the vanished civilization of Rapa Nui. In the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, where endless blue meets endless sky, there lies a small triangular island so remote that it seems forgotten by time itself. Easter Island, known to its original inhabitants as Rapa Nui, sits more than 2,000 miles from the nearest populated land. It is perhaps the most isolated inhabited island on Earth, a tiny speck of volcanic rock rising from the ocean depths like an ancient memory surfacing in the mind of a dreaming giant. The island measures only 14 miles at its longest point and 7 miles at its widest. A mere 64 square miles of land surrounded by the infinite Pacific. 3 extinct volcanoes shape this remote paradise: Rano, Raraku, Poike, and Teravaka. These sleeping mountains, their fires long extinguished, created the foundation upon which one of history's most mysterious civilizations would flourish and ultimately vanish. Imagine yourself standing on a cliff overlooking this isolated world. The trade winds carry the scent of salt and grass across rolling hills that once supported a thriving society. The landscape undulates gently, covered in grassland that waves like a green ocean under the endless sky. Here and there, the dark volcanic stone breaks through the earth, reminding visitors of the island's fiery birth millions of years ago. The isolation of Easter Island is almost incomprehensible to our modern minds. When the first Polynesian voyagers arrived here, they had sailed across more ocean than any other migrating people in human history. They left behind the familiar islands of their ancestors and ventured into the unknown, guided only by the stars, the waves, and an extraordinary knowledge of navigation that seems almost supernatural to us today. These first inhabitants found an island unlike any they had known. Unlike other Polynesian islands with their coral reefs and lagoons, Easter Island rose steeply from deep ocean waters. There were no protective reefs, no sheltered harbors, just sheer cliffs and rocky shores where powerful waves crashed endlessly against the volcanic stone. The island had only 3 small sandy beaches, making landing a dangerous endeavor that required perfect timing and considerable skill. Yet despite these challenges, or perhaps because of them, the people who came to call this place home developed a civilization that would create some of the most enigmatic monuments in human history. They transformed this remote outpost into a complex society with its own unique culture, religion, and artistic traditions that would endure for more than 1,000 years. The island's isolation worked both as a blessing and a curse. Protected from outside invasion and interference, the Rapa Nui people developed their culture in remarkable independence. They created their own solutions to the challenges of island life, developed unique agricultural techniques, and built a society unlike any other in Polynesia. But this same isolation would eventually contribute to their civilization's collapse, as they had nowhere to turn when their island's resources became depleted and their society faced internal strife. As you drift deeper into relaxation, picture yourself as one of those early voyagers, your outrigger canoe cutting through the Pacific swells. You have been at sea for weeks, following the flight patterns of birds and reading the subtle signs in the waves that speak of land ahead. The Southern Cross guides you through the night, And finally, after what seems like an eternity on the open ocean, a dark silhouette appears on the horizon. This is your new home, your refuge at the edge of the world, where you will build something extraordinary from the volcanic stone and ocean winds. The story begins in darkness and starlight, somewhere between the 8th and 10th centuries of our era, when master navigators guided their double-hulled voyaging canoes across thousands of miles of open Pacific. These weren't random wanderers lost at sea, but skilled seafarers who could read the ocean like a book, understanding the subtle language of waves, winds, and stars that guided them to lands beyond the horizon. Legend speaks of Matu'a, the first king of Easter Island, who led his people on an epic voyage from their homeland in the Marquesas Islands. The oral traditions tell us that Matu'a's advisor, a wise man named Haumaka, experienced a prophetic dream in which his spirit traveled across the ocean to discover a new land. In this dream, he saw 3 small offshore islets that would serve as markers for the main island beyond. When Haumaka awakened and described his vision, Matu'a knew their destiny lay across the waters. The preparation for such a journey would have taken months or even years. These voyagers didn't simply set sail on a whim. They planned meticulously, gathering everything they would need to establish life on a new island. They packed their canoes with breadfruit trees, sweet potatoes, bananas, sugarcane, and paper mulberry plants. They brought chickens, their most valuable protein source, carefully protected in woven baskets. Most importantly, they carried with them the knowledge of their ancestors, the songs and stories that would preserve their culture in this new land. Picture these magnificent vessels cutting through the Pacific swells. The double-hulled canoes were marvels of Polynesian engineering, capable of carrying entire families along with all their possessions across thousands of miles of open ocean. The hulls, carved from massive trees, were lashed together with coconut fiber rope and sealed with breadfruit sap. Between the hulls, a platform provided living space and storage for the precious cargo that would seed their new civilization. The navigators possessed knowledge that seems almost mystical to modern minds. They could determine their position and direction by observing the patterns of waves reflected off distant islands, even when those islands lay below the horizon. They read the flight patterns of seabirds, knowing which species would venture far from land and which would stay close to shore. They memorized the positions of hundreds of stars and understood how these celestial guides changed with the seasons and their position on Earth. During the day, they sailed by cloud formations, knowing that certain types of clouds form over land and can be seen from great distances. They felt the temperature of the water and observed its color, understanding how these subtle changes indicated the presence of islands, reefs, or deep ocean currents. Every detail of the ocean environment provided information for those skilled enough to interpret it. As Matu'a and his followers approached their new home, they would have seen first the 3 small islets that Haumaka had described in his dream vision: Rapa Nui, Motu'iti, and Motu'kaukau. These rocky outcrops, rising from the churning waters off the southwestern coast, confirmed that they had found the land of prophecy. Beyond these marker islands, the main island of Rapa Nui rose from the ocean, its volcanic peaks shrouded in clouds. The landing would have been treacherous, unlike many Polynesian islands protected by coral reefs and blessed with calm lagoons. Easter Island presented a formidable challenge to approaching voyagers. Rocky shores and powerful waves threatened to dash their precious canoes against the volcanic stone. They would have had to time their approach carefully, waiting for the right conditions to bring their vessels safely to shore. Tradition tells us that Matu'a first set foot on the island at Anakina Beach, one of the few sandy shores on the otherwise rocky coastline. Here, protected somewhat from the worst of the ocean's fury, the first settlers established their beachhead in the New World. They pulled their canoes safely above the high tide line and began the monumental task of creating a new civilization. From the raw materials of this isolated island, the early settlers found an island dramatically different from their tropical Polynesian homeland. Instead of the lush rainforests and coral atolls they had known, they discovered a landscape shaped by volcanic forces and sculpted by relentless winds. The island supported a unique ecosystem, including the now extinct Easter Island palm, which grew larger than any palm tree found elsewhere in Polynesia. These early inhabitants divided themselves into family groups or clans, each claiming different portions of the island as their territory. Archaeological evidence suggests that the population grew steadily during these early centuries, as the settlers adapted to their new environment and developed the agricultural and social systems that would support an increasingly complex civilization. As you relax and breathe deeply, imagine yourself among these first settlers, feeling the solid ground beneath your feet after weeks on the rolling ocean. The trade winds carry new scents, different from those of your homeland, and you begin the ancient human task of making a new place into home. Around you, your fellow voyagers unload the precious cargo that will seed this civilization. And in the distance, the volcanic peaks stand silent, waiting to witness the rise and fall of the culture that will leave its mark on their stone faces. In the shadow of Rano Raraku, the island's most sacred volcano, something extraordinary began to emerge from the volcanic stone. Over the course of several centuries, the people of Rapa Nui undertook one of the most ambitious artistic projects in human history. They carved nearly 900 stone statues known as Moai, each one a masterpiece of sculpture that required immense skill, planning, and communal effort. The Moai are not merely statues in the way we might think of garden ornaments or decorative sculptures. They are ancestral beings, the physical manifestations of deceased chiefs and important leaders who were believed to continue watching over and protecting their descendants. Each Moai represented a specific individual, carved with subtle differences that would have been recognizable to the people who knew these ancestors in life. The majority of these stone giants were carved at Rano Raraku, where the volcanic tuff provided ideal material for sculpting. This yellowish-grey stone was soft enough to carve with the basalt handpicks used by the sculptors, yet hard enough to preserve fine details and withstand centuries of exposure to wind and rain. The quarry site became a sacred place, where master craftsmen passed their knowledge down through generations of apprentices. Picture the scene at Rano Raraku during the height of Moai production. The slopes of the crater would have been alive with activity as dozens of work crews labored on different statues. The sound of stone tools striking rock would have echoed across the volcanic crater from dawn until dusk. Families would have brought food and water to sustain the workers, and the entire community would have participated in this monumental undertaking. The process of creating a Moai was incredibly complex and time-consuming. First, master sculptors would select an appropriate section of the quarry face and outline the statue's basic form. They worked from the top down, gradually revealing the Moai's distinctive features: the prominent brow, the long nose, the small mouth, and the massive ears that gave rise to early European visitors' mistaken belief that the islanders were long ears. As the sculpture took shape, teams of workers would use smaller tools to refine the details. They carved the eye sockets with careful precision, knowing that these would later be fitted with eyes made of white coral and red volcanic stone. They shaped the hands, typically positioned with long fingers resting on the torso. Some Moai were given additional decorative elements, including intricate designs carved on their backs representing the tattoos that marked their status in life. The largest Moai ever carved, known as El Gigante, measures over 60 feet tall and weighs an estimated 270 tons. Even the average Moai stands about 13 feet high and weighs 14 tons. Creating sculptures of this size without metal tools or machinery represents an extraordinary achievement of human ingenuity and determination. Once a Moai was completed at the quarry, it faced perhaps an even greater challenge: transportation to its final destination. Most of the statues were destined for ceremonial platforms called ahu, located around the island's perimeter. These massive stone platforms served as sacred sites where communities could commune with their ancestral protectors. The transportation of the Moai remains one of archaeology's most fascinating puzzles. How did the islanders move these massive stone sculptures across miles of rough terrain using only the tools and techniques available to a Stone Age civilization? Various theories have been proposed and tested, from rolling the statues on wooden logs to sliding them on wooden sledges or even walking them upright using ropes. Recent experimental archaeology suggests that the most likely method involved walking the Moai in an upright position using a coordinated team of people pulling ropes attached to the statue's head and sides. This technique, demonstrated with replica Moai, allows the statue to rock from side to side while moving forward, explaining why many of the transported Moai show wear patterns consistent with this method. The spiritual significance of this transportation process cannot be understated. The journey from quarry to Ahu was not merely a logistical challenge, but a sacred pilgrimage. The Moai were believed to absorb mana, or spiritual power, during their creation and transportation. The more difficult the journey, the more mana the statue would possess when it reached its final resting place. At their destinations, the Moai were carefully positioned on the Ahu platforms, typically facing inland to watch over their descendants' communities. The largest Ahu, such as Ahu Tongariki, with its 15 restored Moai, became focal points for religious ceremonies and community gatherings. Here, the ancestors continued their eternal vigil, their stone eyes gazing across the landscape they had once known in life. The creation of the Moai represents the height of Rapa Nui civilization. It demonstrates not only remarkable artistic and engineering skills, but also the social organization necessary to sustain such massive projects over centuries. The fact that the islanders could dedicate enormous resources to these sculptures suggests a stable, prosperous society with sufficient surplus labor and strong central leadership. As you continue to relax and drift towards sleep, imagine yourself as one of the skilled sculptors working on Rano Raraku's sacred slopes. Feel the weight of the stone tools in your hands and the satisfaction of seeing the ancestor's face emerge from the volcanic rock. Around you, your fellow craftsmen work with quiet concentration, each contributing to this eternal project that will outlast all of your lifetimes. The trade winds carry the dust of carved stone, and in that dust lie the dreams and devotions of a civilization that poured its very soul into these silent guardians. Between the 12th and 15th centuries, Easter Island experienced what we might consider its golden age. During this period, the population reached its peak, estimated between 15 to 20,000 inhabitants, living in a complex society that had developed remarkable solutions to the challenges of island life. This was a civilization in full flower, with sophisticated agricultural systems, elaborate religious practices, and artistic achievements that would endure long after the society itself had transformed. The island during this golden age would have been dramatically different from the grassland landscape that greets visitors today. Dense forests of native palms covered much of the interior, creating a canopy that sheltered a rich ecosystem of endemic plants and animals. The largest of these trees, the Easter Island palm, grew to heights exceeding 60 feet, with trunks so massive that they rivaled California's redwoods in girth. These giants provided timber for construction, tools, and most importantly, the canoes that connected different parts of the island and enabled fishing in the deeper waters offshore. The Rapa Nui people had developed an intricate understanding of their island's ecology and climate. They created sophisticated agricultural systems that maximized the productivity of their limited land. In the island's interior, They constructed extensive field systems with stone walls and terraces that protected crops from the constant trade winds and created microclimates suitable for cultivation. These carefully planned gardens allowed them to grow sweet potatoes, taro, bananas, and other Polynesian crops that formed the foundation of their diet. One of their most ingenious innovations was the development of manavai, circular stone enclosures that created protected growing spaces for individual plants. These stone gardens, thousands of which dot the island's landscape, trapped moisture from the air and provided shelter from the drying winds. Inside each manavai, a single banana plant or other valuable crop could thrive in conditions that would otherwise be too harsh for cultivation. The society was organized around extended family groups or clans, each associated with specific territories and ancestral Moai. These clans competed with each other in elaborate ceremonies and rituals, but they also cooperated in major undertakings such as Moai construction and transportation. The island's political structure centered around paramount chiefs who claimed descent from the original founder, Matu'a, and who possessed both temporal and spiritual authority over their followers. Religious life on Easter Island during this golden age was rich and complex, centered around the veneration of ancestors and the accumulation of spiritual power, or mana. The Moai served as conduits between the world of the living and the realm of the ancestors, their stone eyes gazing eternally over the communities they protected. Religious ceremonies took place at the Ahu platforms, where priests conducted rituals involving offerings of food, carved wooden figures, and elaborate chanted prayers. The islanders developed a unique script called Rongorongo, one of the few independent writing systems created in Polynesia. These mysterious symbols carved on wooden tablets recorded sacred chants, genealogies, and religious texts. The exact meaning of Rongorongo remains largely undeciphered, but its existence demonstrates the sophisticated intellectual achievements of Rapa Nui civilization at its height. Art flourished during this golden age in forms beyond the famous Moai. Master carvers created intricate petroglyphs covering thousands of volcanic boulders across the island. These rock carvings depicted everything from fishing boats and birds to abstract symbols and human figures. The most common motif was the Tangata Manu, or birdman, a half-human, half-bird figure that played a central role in the island's religious beliefs. The Rapa Nui people also excelled in wood carving, creating ceremonial objects, religious figures, and decorative items from the island's native trees. They carved rei miro, crescent-shaped wooden ornaments worn by people of high status, and Moai kava, emaciated human figures that may have represented ancestors or spirits. These wooden sculptures demonstrate the same artistic mastery seen in the stone Moai, but on a more intimate scale. Textile production was another important art form, with skilled weavers creating bark cloth from the paper mulberry trees brought by the original settlers. This tapa cloth was decorated with geometric patterns and used for clothing, ceremonial wrappings, and religious purposes. The finest examples required months of patient work, as the artisans built up complex designs through repeated applications of plant-based dyes. The Golden Age was also marked by remarkable feats of engineering beyond the famous Moai. The islanders constructed extensive networks of stone roads connecting different parts of the island, some of which can still be traced today. They built sophisticated water management systems, including stone-lined wells and reservoirs that captured and stored precious rainfall. At sites like Ahu Vinapu, they demonstrated masonry skills that rival the finest Inca stonework, fitting massive blocks together with such precision that no mortar was needed. Trade and exchange flourished during this period, not with other islands due to Rapa Nui's extreme isolation, but within the island itself. Different clans specialized in producing particular goods, from obsidian tools quarried at specific volcanic sites to feathers from seabirds nesting on offshore islets. This internal trade network required sophisticated systems of exchange and reciprocity that strengthened social bonds and distributed resources across the island. The population during this golden age was organized into numerous settlements scattered across the island, each centered around one or more ahu platforms. The largest settlements were located along the coast, where residents could take advantage of both marine resources and agricultural opportunities. Inland settlements focused more heavily on farming and the exploitation of forest resources. As you sink deeper into peaceful rest, imagine Easter Island during its golden age of prosperity. Picture the forests that once covered the rolling hills, their canopy alive with native birds that no longer exist. Feel the energy of a thriving civilization at work. Families tending their carefully protected gardens. Master craftsmen carving the ancestors from stone. Children learning the ancient chants that preserve their people's history. This was a world complete unto itself, a civilization that had found its own unique solutions to the eternal human challenges of survival and meaning in an isolated corner of the vast Pacific. The transformation of Easter Island from a forested paradise, supporting a complex civilization to the barren grassland, encountered by European explorers, represents one of history's most dramatic ecological and social collapses. This collapse, which occurred gradually over several centuries beginning around 1400 CE, offers a sobering lesson about the consequences of environmental degradation and the fragility of isolated societies. The decline began subtly, with changes that might not have seemed significant to the islanders experiencing them. As the population continued to grow and spread across the island, the demand for resources intensified. Trees were cut down faster than they could regenerate, not just for construction and tools, but for the massive undertaking of Moai transportation. Archaeological evidence suggests that moving a single Moai from quarry to platform required hundreds of trees for rollers, sledges and ropes. The Easter Island palm, the giant that had dominated the island's forests, proved particularly vulnerable to overexploitation. These slow-growing trees took decades to reach maturity, but they could be felled in hours to serve immediate needs. As the largest palms disappeared, the islanders turned to smaller species, gradually working their way down through the forest ecosystem. Archaeological studies of pollen preserved in lake sediments tell the story of this deforestation with heartbreaking clarity, showing the gradual disappearance of native species over several centuries. The loss of the forests created a cascade of ecological disasters. Without tree roots to hold the soil in place, erosion increased dramatically. The rich volcanic soil that had supported agriculture for centuries washed away in violent storms, leaving behind thin layers that could barely sustain crops. The island's streams and springs began to fail as the watershed was compromised, making fresh water increasingly scarce. Perhaps most critically, the disappearance of the forests meant the end of canoe construction. The giant palms had provided the timber necessary for building the large outrigger canoes that enabled deep-sea fishing and transportation around the island's treacherous coast. Without these vessels, the islanders became trapped on their island, unable to access the rich fishing grounds of the open ocean or even to travel safely between different parts of their homeland. The loss of maritime capability had profound implications for both diet and society. Fish had provided crucial protein for the growing population, and without access to deep-sea fishing, the islanders became increasingly dependent on land-based resources that were already under stress. Coastal fishing from shore provided some protein, but nothing like the abundance that had been available from ocean fishing expeditions. As resources became scarcer, competition between clans intensified. The cooperative spirit that had enabled massive projects like Moai construction gave way to conflict and warfare. Archaeological evidence from this period shows increasing construction of defensive fortifications, refuge caves, and weapons. Obsidian spear points, once used primarily for tools and ceremonial purposes, appear in greater numbers as weapons of war. The social structure that had supported Moai construction began to break down. With clans fighting over diminishing resources, the elaborate ceremonies and cooperative labor projects that had characterized the Golden Age became impossible to maintain. Moai construction ceased around 1500 CE, with nearly 400 statues abandoned at various stages of completion at the Rano Raraku quarry. These unfinished giants remain there today, eternal witnesses to the civilization's interrupted dreams. As traditional authority structures collapsed, new forms of social organization emerged. The cult of the Tangata Manu, or birdman, gained prominence as an alternative to the ancestor-focused religion centered around the Moai. This new cult focused on an annual competition held at the offshore islet of Rapa Nui, where representatives of different clans would swim to the islet and compete to return with the first sooty tern egg of the breeding season. The winner's sponsor would become the Tangata Manu for the year. Gaining significant political and spiritual authority, the Birdman cult represented a fundamental shift in Rapa Nui society, from a focus on ancestors and tradition to an emphasis on annual renewal and competition. The petroglyphs at Orongo ceremonial village, perched on the rim of Rano Kau crater, tell the story of this new religion through hundreds of carved Birdman figures that contrast sharply with the stately Moai of earlier centuries. Population decline accompanied ecological collapse. Without sufficient food and resources, the island could no longer support its peak population. Some estimates suggest that the population fell from its maximum of 15 to 20,000 down to as few as 2 to 3,000 by the time of European contact. This demographic collapse would have torn apart the fabric of society, leaving communities too small to maintain their traditional knowledge and practices. The period of collapse was marked by unprecedented violence. Archaeological evidence reveals that warfare became endemic, with fortified settlements and refuge caves showing signs of repeated use. Traditional oral histories speak of battles between the long ears and short ears, though these terms likely refer to different social classes or occupational groups rather than physical characteristics. The violence culminated in events that the oral traditions remember as near genocide, with one group attempting to eliminate another entirely. Cultural knowledge began to disappear as rapidly as the forests had vanished. The Rongo script fell out of use, with the last literate scribes taking their knowledge to their graves. Traditional crafts declined as the materials needed for fine work became unavailable. The complex agricultural systems that had supported the civilization required constant maintenance. But with communities focused on survival and warfare, these carefully constructed gardens were abandoned and quickly overgrown. By the time the first European explorers arrived in the 18th century, they found an island dramatically different from the forested paradise that had supported the Moai builders. The treeless landscape, eroded soils, and small population gave no hint of the sophisticated civilization that had once flourished there. The massive stone statues stood as mysterious sentinels over a transformed world, their creators' achievements all but forgotten by their own descendants. Yet even in collapse, the resilience of human adaptation shone through. The survivors developed new ways of life suited to their changed environment. They created extensive stone garden systems that maximized productivity from the degraded soils. They learned to exploit every available resource, from seabird eggs collected on dangerous cliff faces to the cultivation of drought-resistant crops that could survive in the harsh conditions. As you drift towards sleep, reflect on this profound transformation. Picture the last great tree falling somewhere in the island's interior, its crash echoing across hills that would never again know the forest's shade. feel the weight of choices made by people trying to survive in increasingly difficult circumstances, not knowing that their individual decisions would collectively reshape their world forever. In their story lies both tragedy and wisdom, a reminder of the delicate balance between human ambition and natural limits. Today, Easter Island stands as a haunting monument to both human achievement and the consequences of environmental collapse. The nearly 900 Moai that dot the landscape continue their eternal vigil, watching over an island transformed beyond recognition from the world their creators knew. These stone giants have become symbols not only of artistic achievement, but of resilience, mystery, and the complex relationship between human societies and their environment. Modern visitors to Rapa Nui encounter an island that tells multiple stories simultaneously. The Moai themselves reveal new secrets as archaeological techniques advance. We now know that many of the statues have bodies buried beneath centuries of soil accumulation, making them far larger than previously understood. Excavations at Rano Raraku have revealed Moai buried up to their necks, their hidden torsos decorated with intricate carvings and petroglyphs that had been invisible for generations. The restoration of Ahu Tongariki, completed in the 1990s, demonstrated both the fragility and the endurance of Rapa Nui's monuments. This ceremonial platform, with its 15 massive Moai, had been scattered by a tsunami in 1960, its statues toppled and broken. The painstaking restoration project, supported by Japanese funding and expertise, required years of careful work to reassemble the shattered pieces and return the Moai to their proper positions. Today, visitors can witness sunrise behind these restored giants, experiencing something close to what the ancient inhabitants would have seen during their dawn ceremonies. Archaeological research continues to reveal new aspects of the vanished civilization. Recent discoveries include evidence of sophisticated astronomical alignments in the placement of certain Ahu platforms, suggesting that the Moai were positioned not only to watch over communities, but to mark significant celestial events. Some platforms align with the rising or setting positions of important stars, while others mark the solstices and equinoxes that were crucial for agricultural timing. The mystery of Rongorongo, the island's unique script, remains one of archaeology's most tantalizing puzzles. Fewer than 30 wooden tablets bearing these hieroglyphic-like symbols survived the cultural collapse and subsequent European contact. Modern scholars have identified patterns and recurring sequences in the script, suggesting it recorded chanted texts rather than narrative prose. Some researchers believe they have identified symbols representing celestial bodies, seasonal markers, and genealogical information. But the full decipherment of Rongorongo remains elusive. DNA studies of Easter Island's inhabitants have provided new insights into the island's settlement history. The genetic evidence confirms Polynesian origins for the original inhabitants, but also reveals traces of South American ancestry that may date to pre-European times. This finding has rekindled debates about possible contact between Easter Island and the South American mainland, though the extent and significance of any such contact remains controversial among researchers. The ecological restoration of Easter Island presents ongoing challenges and opportunities. Efforts to reintroduce native plant species have had mixed success, as the island's ecosystem was fundamentally altered by centuries of deforestation and the introduction of grazing animals. However, some progress has been made in protecting the remaining endemic species and controlling invasive plants that threaten archaeological sites. Climate change now poses new threats to Easter Island's cultural heritage. Rising sea levels threaten coastal Ahu platforms, while changing weather patterns affect the preservation of the Moai themselves. Salt spray carried further inland by stronger storms accelerates the weathering of volcanic stone, potentially damaging petroglyphs and statue surfaces that have survived for centuries. The modern Rapa Nui people, descendants of the island's original inhabitants who survived contact, environmental collapse and colonial exploitation, continue to play a vital role in preserving and interpreting their ancestors' legacy. Their oral traditions, though disrupted by historical trauma, still preserve fragments of ancient knowledge about the Moai builders and their beliefs. Contemporary Rapa Nui artists draw inspiration from their ancestors' achievements, creating new works that honor traditional forms while addressing modern themes. Tourism to Easter Island has brought both benefits and challenges. The income generated by visitors supports the local economy and funds conservation efforts. But the sheer number of people visiting the remote island strains its infrastructure and threatens its fragile archaeological sites. Efforts to balance preservation with access have led to new regulations limiting visitor numbers and restricting access to the most sensitive areas. The island's isolation, which once contributed to its civilization's collapse, now serves as protection for its archaeological treasures. Unlike many other Pacific islands, Easter Island's remoteness has prevented extensive development and preserved vast areas of archaeological significance. This isolation has also allowed researchers to study the island's ecological and cultural history as a relatively closed system, providing insights into the complex relationships between environment and society. Recent research has challenged some earlier interpretations of Easter Island's history. Rather than a simple story of ecological collapse leading to societal failure, scholars now recognize a more complex narrative involving environmental change, social adaptation, and external factors including disease and slave raids following European contact. The resilience of Rapa Nui culture, which survived despite enormous challenges, has become as important a part of the island's story as the more dramatic tale of collapse. The Moai continue to reveal new secrets through innovative research techniques. Laser scanning and 3D modeling have documented subtle details in the statues that were invisible to earlier researchers. These technologies have revealed evidence of the redstone hats, or pukao, that once crowned many Moai, as well as traces of the white coral and red stone, eyes that gave the statues their lifelike appearance in ancient times. Experimental archaeology has provided insights into the methods used to create and transport the Moai. Recent experiments have successfully demonstrated how teams of workers could have walked the statues from quarry to platform using coordinated rope work, supporting theories about transportation methods first proposed by studying the distribution patterns of abandoned Moai along ancient roads. As you settle into sleep, imagine Easter Island as it exists today, a place where ancient mysteries coexist with modern research, where stone giants stand sentinel over a landscape still revealing its secrets. Picture the Moai at dawn, their faces catching the first light of day as they have for centuries, eternal guardians of knowledge, both lost and slowly being recovered. In their silent presence lies the story of human ambition, creativity, and resilience, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to create beauty and meaning, even in the most isolated corners of our world. The wind still carries the songs of the ancestors across the grass-covered hills, and in that wind, the vanished civilization of Easter Island continues to speak to all who take the time to listen. Rest now in the peace of this ancient place, where time moves slowly and the stone faces of the ancestors watch over all who seek to understand the mysteries of our shared human heritage.